So I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Roger Martin. He is the founder of Grow for Vets. As you know, we have an epidemic in this country with veterans killing themselves. Despite Colorado not allowing PTSD as a qualifying condition, and there is a lawsuit for that right now, we do believe that PTSD can be helped by cannabis. So I'm really excited to hear your story, Roger. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. First thing I have to do, if I could please, is ask for your indulgence. I deal with death pretty much on a daily basis. Normally drugs are involved in that. Sometimes it's just psychiatric conditions, but typically those also involve a lot of drugs. And a couple days ago it came pretty close to home with a 23-year-old who was like a son to me, who put a gun to his head. So I almost actually called you, Michelle, yesterday because I was not in a sound emotional state. Probably wasn't sure I could be by today, and I was until I listened to that sweetheart Alexis talking about her mentor. I first saw Alexis, as you did, in Fort Worth, Texas at the end of February, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house, and there were hundreds of people there. Her story is very compelling. And it's great that she's able to get the publicity she gets to educate, the public that cannabis is a medicine. It's not something dangerous. I'm not going to talk a lot about myself other than just give you a brief background because people always want to know. I retired in 1999, and was enjoying my retirement. I was in another lifetime involved in law enforcement, local, state, and federal. So cannabis, while I didn't deal with cannabis, especially at the federal level, cannabis to me was a drug. All of my kids were, or most of them were big athletes, so they didn't do drugs or anything like that, and neither did I, and I kind of drank the Kool-Aid, I guess, because I'm obviously back to the Nixon administration era, so when Tricky Dick decided that cannabis should be classified just like heroin and cocaine in the same category, I was right there. When the news media, they don't cover the war like they did in my day, but the one video they loved to show was the one guy in Vietnam, probably in the history of the Vietnam War, who was smoking cannabis out of a shotgun. And that had a pretty big impact. But I have to tell you, I don't know any veteran who ever saw anybody in Vietnam or Southeast Asia smoking cannabis out of a shotgun. Probably not the smartest thing in the world to do unless you have two purposes in mind, I guess. So anyway, I was retired, and in 2013, I was, well, first I should back up just a second, I guess. When OxyContin first came out, that was the drug of choice that they gave me. I mean, literally, pretty much the day it hit the market. And long story short, by October of 2010, I was taking 180 milligrams of that a day, taking 40 milligrams of Ambien to be able to sleep 1 to 2 hours a night, and having been involved in the entertainment business in another lifetime, everybody who died, they did a toxicology report, who was in the entertainment business, they always had Ambien and OxyContin in their bloodstream. I was fortunate that at the time I was living in Lake Tahoe, and I met a doctor who ran an addiction clinic for young kids who were rich kids, who were ski bums, kind of a deal, who were hooked on heroin. And so I met her at a social function, and I told her my story, and that I wanted to get off of OxyContin. I had tried to do it twice, actually, cold turkey, against my doctor's advice, and I had to be hospitalized both times. It's a very, very terrible drug. Anyway, so she runs this addiction clinic, and she used Suboxone to get these kids off of heroin. It was very effective. And she said she'd never tried it with OxyContin because it's also an opiate. She thought that might work. So, long story short, I went in. They, gave me Suboxone. I was off of OxyContin. But it turned out she was a bad doctor. She didn't tell me that for it to work, I was supposed to take it for 12 to 18 months. And had I not done some consulting for her later and ended up speaking to the rep that repped Suboxone, I'd have never known that. When I told him that I had weaned myself off of Suboxone in 5.5 weeks, he literally almost fell out of his chair. Because again, it's not supposed to be effective. So it was great that I was off opiates. but sometimes I would literally go 2 to 3 days without sleep. And the doctors in the audience will tell you that sleep deprivation is something obviously that we use in the military quite frequently. And sleep deprivation can make you crazy. So obviously I didn't want to be crazy, but I certainly wasn't going to go back to taking OxyContin, or to continue to taking Suboxone. So I was fortunate. I met another doctor who was a good doctor, and she suggested I try cannabis. You know, I told her she was crazy, that was a drug, and I wasn't going to do that, and so on and so forth. Well, after a couple of months of considering it and not sleeping very well, I decided to try it. So it's one thing I want to interject to that's really great about the impact and what Impact's doing is, you know, I go around the country all the time to events like the one I saw Alexis at in Texas, and typically it's not the kind of people who spoke here today, okay? It's oftentimes a lot of people who don't know what the hell they're talking about, first of all. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I had the guy that I lost on Friday sitting next to me in an audience, and a doctor would be up there talking to me, and he'd be elbowing me and saying, that's just total BS. That's not right. You know, scientifically it makes no sense. So that's what's cool about what's going on here. I think probably the coolest factor. As a matter of fact, when I spoke with Charlotte earlier, who spoke at the beginning, I was very excited to hear about, you know, what goes into the medicine that they make. Because my first edible experience, or experience with cannabis at all, ever, actually that's not true. I grew up in Nebraska, and I took a couple of hits one time off some Nebraska ditch weed. Did nothing for me, so I figured, why would I even bother with this? But anyway, I lived in Clyde Village, Crystal Bay, which if you don't know is in the north end of the lake. And there was no cannabis, obviously, in Nevada, so I had to drive around the lake to South Lake Tahoe to a dispensary. And I go in, and there's this long-haired, you know, hippie dude behind the counter and stuff, but everything was cool, and, you know, we just had an interaction and stuff, and you know, I was used to talking to long-haired hippie dudes because at one point in my life I worked undercover narcotics even. So he said, I told him what my deal was, that I couldn't sleep, and so he said, well, you know, he sold me these cookies, he sold me some tincture and some candy. So I asked him before I left, I said, well, how many of these cookies should I eat? He said, well, no, I said, just eat a little piece of a cookie. If you don't feel anything in a while, eat some more. So in the parking lot, I ate a quarter of the cookie. 10 minutes later, it's about a 45-minute drive back to my house. And I said, 10 minutes later, I feel nothing. So I ate the rest of that cookie, okay? And then about 30 minutes later, I still didn't feel anything. And so I ate the second cookie, and I took some of the tincture, ate a piece of the candy. And long story short, I was supposed to be in Reno, Nevada, to get on a plane to fly to North Carolina at 5 a.m. the next morning. But 11 o'clock that night, I'm sure I'm dying. I mean, I'm sure. And my two youngest sons not been there with me, I probably have called 911 or, you know, jumped off my balcony or something, you know. I kept telling them I'm having a heart attack. No, Dad, you're fine. So I don't remember how I got to North Carolina. I got there. I remember the day after I got there. So anyway, it's really refreshing to hear, and it's kind of an emotional thing for me actually to hear, you know, from the scientists, from the doctors. You know, my card, I think, is from a script mill, actually, and I you know, appreciate the fact that Dr. Cohen, for example, isn't a script mill, and because again, it's important that, you know, in California, for example, I can't tell you how many young kids I knew who would go into a doctor, and the doctor would ask them what's wrong, and say, well, I fell down skiing today. Okay, here's your, you know, $200, here's your card. The big thing that disturbs me about the whole medical system, you know, what I've learned in the last 5+ years, I believe that cannabis should be regulated like tomatoes. So when I hear this regulate cannabis like alcohol, that upsets my stomach when I hear that, because if in Colorado, if alcohol was regulated the way cannabis is regulated, we'd have no alcohol. Just an absolute fact. MED, who was mentioned briefly here earlier, which is the Marijuana Enforcement Division, are the Keystone Cops, are way above MED. What happens in most of these states is they put alcohol people in charge, or guys that were street cops in Arvada or whatever, and they put people who know nothing about cannabis whatsoever. And they don't care about cannabis. They care about their job. They care about creating more jobs. They want to generate the tax revenue so they can create more jobs for themselves and their buddies. And that's really what it's all about. So all the regulation, 100% of it, in my mind, is BS. Now, if you don't know, I know that the media touts that 22 veterans a day commit suicide. I'll tell you right now, that's absolute crap. That study, the 22 number comes from a VA study. The VA conducted it themselves in 2012. They only included 21 states in that study. 23% of the deaths reported had no cause of death listed whatsoever. And they left out a few little states like New York, Texas, and California, which I'm sure must house, at least a couple of veterans. And so that study is totally bogus. And matter of fact, the scientist who did the study said, don't rely, right in the study said, don't rely on this number because it's probably not accurate. But everybody uses that number. The reality is, and I'm sure that the number I'm going to throw out is a low ball as well, is that we lose over 50 veterans a day to prescription drug overdose and suicide. It's as simple as that. Virtually every veteran who commits suicide does so while they're under the influence of drugs. We have veterans come to Grow for Vets who are taking 20, 25 different prescription meds every single day. It's just so what happened to me in 2013, I had a young German Shepherd pup, and I'm training him at a training facility. I started running these young veterans who were training their service dogs. And I started talking to them. They told me they were taking 20, 25 different drugs, but the cannabis was what helped them. It was the only thing that helped them. I've had thousands of veterans now in the last 2.5+ years tell me the cannabis is the only thing that's ever helped them with PTSD. Not one drug that the VA's given has ever helped at all. And in many cases, it makes them a lot worse. Okay? Imagine for a minute that you're a beautiful young girl like Alexis or her little sister. And instead of the loving parents and the great father that these girls have, your father just came back from Afghanistan. Okay? And they give him a bunch of drugs, and he's a raving lunatic. He doesn't want to play with you, can't stay with you, locks himself in closets even. So he can't even be a father. He can't be a husband, brother, son, any of those things. There are tens of thousands of American heroes out there today that are living that nightmare. That's their life. And that's why I do what I do. Grow for Vets was the first organization to ever give free cannabis to veterans. Back in early 2014. To my knowledge, we're the only tax-exempt nonprofit organization that does this. We were actually literally shocked when we got our tax-exempt status from the IRS. As a matter of fact, I had formed another corporation, a nonprofit corporation, a few months prior to the time they granted us our tax-exempt status, because the lawyers were all telling me you're never going to get it because you give cannabis. You give out cannabis. And about a month later or so, here comes the letter from the IRS. They gave us our tax-exempt status. So, I think that the fact that we're veterans, makes a big difference. Alexis is a child. A lot of these oil bills that were brought up earlier too, I'm adamantly opposed to all of those. I was so glad when the one in Florida went down, because the way I'm looking at it is, if they pass that bill, then the next year when they're asking them to give, full cannabis with THC and to prove that, they're going to say, wait a minute, we just gave you the oil bill last year. So to me, that's not a baby step. That's a step in the wrong direction. I will tell you too, and again, I can't talk as a scientist. I'm not a scientist. My background's in criminal justice, and so I didn't take a lot of science, but I can tell you anecdotally that cannabis is the only medicine that a lot of our members now take. So we're taking 20, 25 different prescription medications a day. We encourage them at Grow for Vets to continue their psychiatric care, or their counseling, or whatever, because again, cannabis is not an end-all, cure-all. But I will tell you too that the most effective cannabis that the veterans tell me anecdotally is a 1-to-1 ratio. Plain and simple, no ifs, ands, or buts. The guy that I lost Friday created our first oils. They were very, very successful. Some of them were very high in THC, very high in CBD, but they're almost all 1-to-1. And we used some other oils prior to that he created, and we didn't get as good a results. But when he went to the 1-to-1, that's what helped. So I'm not at all a believer in CBD only. Dr. Cohen mentioned Jake Plummer. We're getting ready to embark later this year on a national tour called the American Hero Cannabis Tour. My partner in that tour is Marvin Washington, who played 11 years in the NFL. He's actually the man who first enlightened Jake Plummer about cannabis in general. And he played most of his career for the New York Jets, but he was lucky to be traded or whatever. I don't know if he was a free agent or what, I never asked him. But to end up on the 98 Denver Bronco Super Bowl championship team. So he didn't have to wallow in mediocrity in the Jets for his whole career. So anyway, Marvin, like Jake, when I met him, was a CBD-only advocate. Because again, he doesn't believe in drugs. He didn't want. But Marvin's mission is to do the same thing for former players who are destitute, athletes, that we do for veterans. Most people think that all NFL players are multimillionaires. That's not the case at all. The average, life of an NFL career is, I think, 3.5 years or something like that. And 83% of all NFL players are broke within 3 years after they retire. So, there are a lot of them out there. I spoke to one on the phone the other day who was just absolutely, he's in Louisiana, absolutely just desperate. When I looked this guy up, it turns out that after his NFL career, he'd actually gone back to his school, LSU, and shot one of their linebackers in the stomach. Well, people don't just do that for the hell of it. Veteran fathers don't abuse their kids just because they want to abuse them. They don't neglect their family because they want to neglect them. There's no way, I could talk all day, there's no way to explain to somebody who's never been in combat how terrifying that is. Okay? That's one side of it. The other side of it is, there's no way to explain the adrenaline rush that you get from combat. Compare it, if there's anything, it's sex. That's the only thing you can compare it to, literally. And what happens with a lot of these veterans when they come back is they miss that adrenaline rush. And so that's why you see so many of them engage, just out of the blue, they start engaging in reckless, or dangerous activities, skydiving, motorcycle racing, whatever. We lost a young lady who was a captain in the Army a few months ago, who was involved in a motorcycle accident. But she was very, very troubled. She had very bad PTSD, and I'm convinced that it was a suicide. Those deaths aren't even counted. You're driving 80 miles an hour down I-70, and you have an accident. I don't think that's an accident. She started engaging in motorcycle racing a couple of months before that. She'd never done that before. So just those kinds of things. If you know people, veterans, that start doing things like that, to engage in that kind of reckless or dangerous behavior just out of the blue, talk to them. Try to get them to get some help because they have an issue. There's no doubt about it. One last thing I just want to say quickly with regard to what we do. One of the most disturbing things that I encounter, other than death, of course, is the fact that a lot of young veterans, let's say somebody like Alexis's family, and you're a veteran too, her daddy's a veteran, but a lot of them don't have a lot of money. They're not as blessed. They haven't done as well, as Alexis's parents have done, and so they have a limited amount of money. And so this month they can either buy a new pair of shoes for one of their kids, or they can buy some cannabis instead of taking the drugs that they're taking. Well, it's a matter of economics. The cannabis costs some money. To get a card to get cannabis can cost them money in most states that don't have recreational, I love that term, recreational cannabis, recreational alcohol, recreational heroin, whatever. But anyway, they don't have adult use cannabis laws. So they have a choice. So they can either buy the kid the shoes and not buy the cannabis, or they can take the free drugs that the VA shoves down their throats. The deadly prescription cocktail that the VA loves to mix up. I'm absolutely convinced that the VA's philosophy is to keep veterans in a drug stupor until they either die of a drug overdose or they give up all hope and they take their lives. Excuse me. So, that's just a fact. That's a fact of life. So once the veteran's dead, they don't have to worry about and deal with them anymore at all. We got a call from one of the 4,200 veterans that they were talking about in the news the other day. This guy's in Oregon. Please help me. The VA says I'm dead. They declared him dead. The guy's as alive as you and I are.
And then they want the money back.
Well, yes, they want the money back from his wife. They said he'd been dead for 8 months. And they also, they also terminate all his benefits, of course. So he couldn't do anything because he's dead. You know, he walks right in there, has ID, all the whole nine, but he's dead. So, you know, the abuse, the way that the VA neglects and abuses veterans, you know, it just outrages me. Not just because I'm a veteran, but as a human being. I mean, if anybody has earned the right to utilize cannabis, if they want to integrate that into their treatment regimen, who would it be other than a veteran? I mean, to me, it's as simple as that. In many states, as Dr. Cohen will tell you, it can cost $500 or more by the time you go to the doctor and then pay the state some ridiculous fee, $150, $250 just to get a card. Well, if you had to pay the state $250 to be able to walk into Walgreens to buy drugs that they sell, they'd be out of business. So it's just absolutely idiotic. So to me, cannabis should be a first treatment option because it can't kill you like it's killing 50 of us a day. So, you know, as you encounter veterans, I ask that you understand the fact that oftentimes they're facing emotional and mental health challenges, you know, that the rest of the population doesn't have to face. And also, you know, just please keep in mind that, you know, in my mind anyway, a veteran should not have to pay 1 cent to get a medical cannabis card. Not 1 cent. I would thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you.